Welcome to the 8th in a series of 9 professional development sessions offered by the Keystones to Opportunities Grant for the Pittsburgh Public Schools. This presentation is designed to introduce all Pittsburgh Public School teachers and staff to information and approaches for supporting students who are English language learners and is entitled Navigating Content for English Language Learners. Please be sure that you have the participant's guide and handouts associated with this presentation before beginning. To add a bit of context to this training, we must first understand that given the expectations for students graduating from Pennsylvania schools in the 21st century and the need for all students to be, quote, career and college ready at the end of 12th grade, educators will need to rethink the ways by which they approach literacy instruction at all levels, including early learning for students ages birth through 5 years of age. To facilitate this, the Pittsburgh Public Schools received a $10 million grant over the course of the next 5 years. The funding for this grant supports a new literacy plan for the district, monthly professional development sessions such as this, which are tailored to the needs of our district, new diagnostic assessments, including DIBELS and GRADE, literacy specialists who provide RTII, data analysis, professional development, instruction, and Common Core state standard support in all Pittsburgh Public School buildings, as well as heat classroom observations for the targeted grade levels. As you can see, we've come a long way in our first year of professional development. So far, these sessions are not only meant to improve practice as we transition into Common Core state standards, but they also serve as an awareness of what is happening outside the classroom with the content supervisors and KtO specialists as they create the district's new literacy plan, as each of these professional development trainings relate directly to elements of the district's new plan. Anything learned in these sessions can be applied immediately in the classroom as we go along in our learning. Upon completion of this module, participants should be able to recognize and apply culturally responsive literacy practices in their own classrooms and others to create appropriate scaffolds to instruction based on students' English language proficiency levels and to provide a valid response to the guiding question, what are the most effective pathways to maximize English language learners' ability to navigate content? To start, take a look at the 4 principles of literacy development that are presented in this PD. Principle 1, to increase comprehension. 2, to increase student-to-student interaction. 3, to increase higher-order thinking and use of learning strategies. And 4, to make connections to students' background knowledge. These principles that apply to literacy development in English language learners can readily be seen to be familiar goals for all of our students. As a matter of fact, a key way of this training, and most trainings focused on specific subgroups, is that the key principles for supporting their learning can be applied successfully to other and sometimes all learners in a classroom, especially when there is difficult work with which the students will struggle. If we take a look at Principle 1 more in terms of English language learners, increasing comprehension is meant as making meaning through non-linguistic representation as well. Non-linguistic representations of language, often we would recognize those as pictures, illustrations, dramatic role play, the use of video clips, manipulatives, gestures in order to help them understand the content and meaning of text. This, of course, also helps non-English language learners to better understand what they're reading. We know this from the use of graphs and charts and pictures that help support comprehension. But those things are particularly important when English language learners are developing their own literacy in a second language. When we take a look at Principle 2, we all want to increase student-to-student interaction. In accountable talk is something that we are often striving to increase in our classrooms. The issue here with English language learners is that the frequency with which they speak in the new language is dramatically related to their improvement in their fluency in that language. And at present, English language learners speak only about 5% of the time during their school day, which needs to be increased dramatically if they are going to increase in their fluency. Principle number 3 speaks to the fact that an increased higher order thinking and use of learning strategies is essential for literacy development. What's at issue with English language learners and all learners with limited language ability is that there tends to be an assumption that an inability to articulate equals an inability to think at higher levels. This isn't true. So it's important with all students, and in particular with English language learners, to challenge them intellectually, to do inferencing and generalization, even while they are struggling to articulate what it is they are thinking, and to allow that struggle. Principle 4 deals with making connections to students' background knowledge, which we know is essential for new learning in all students. The issue here with English language learners is that often teachers are not familiar with the background knowledge that a student would have accumulated before becoming a student in an English-speaking school. Perhaps they're from another culture, another country, or a dramatically different living experience. It's important for teachers to find out as much as they can about the student's background so that they can make accurate connections and not to make assumptions about what the student knows. Next, we'll do a short activity to help us to better understand the experiences of English language learners or those who are struggling dramatically with reading text. Please be sure that you have this document in front of you in order to begin. You may do this activity individually, in small groups, or with a partner. It's important, though, that anyone who is fluent in French, please keep your particular knowledge of this language to yourself and sort of play along so that the others can get a feel for what it's like to approach a very unfamiliar language. To begin, simply take a moment to read the text to yourself, using any strategies, short of a translator, to get as much of an understanding from this text as you can. You may wish to mark up the text or use any other strategies that you bring with you to a situation where you're presented with difficult text. Please pause the presentation now in order to take a few minutes to do that. Next, go back and look at what you did in order to make sense of this text. What metacognitive strategies did you bring to bear? That is, what skills and strategies did you use to read this text? Please try to identify those and then turn to a partner or in a small group, if you are working with one, and share your approaches to see what you could understand about the meaning of the text. Pause the presentation here to do that work. Some of the more obvious strategies that may have been used include the use of cognates or word parts that are familiar in your native language, such as the word important in the first line or princess in the second. But there are many other strategies that you may not have realized you were using, such as reading left to right, such as understanding that there's a letter-sound correspondence, that C or O make a certain sound. You may have used your knowledge of punctuation as well, seeing that there are quotation marks and so spoken language in the passage, periods where a phrase is ended, an ellipse to show that an interruption has occurred. English language learners may or may not come equipped to use those strategies, and so scaffolding is important so that you can model and point out what strategies might be available to them before reading. Here is a literal translation of the passage so you can check the level of comprehension you were able to derive from the content. Like every morning, the queen awaits important visitors. Mother, says the little princess, I don't have time, my dear. Ask your governess. But mother, I just want a few kisses. I have too much work, my dear. Take my plane and try to find the queen of kisses. Take a moment here to talk to a partner or to think on your own of some things that you could do ahead of time to scaffold this piece of content for an English language learner. What might you do to prepare them to read this content? Pause the presentation here. Some scaffolds might be to pre-teach some vocabulary, to make links between words that have familiar cognates, such as important, princess, if the student is a native speaker of a language that uses those cognates, and to draw attention to the fact that there is dialogue. Also, to look at the illustration for as much information as can be derived. All of these strategies and planning can also be seen as relevant to all students as they approach increasingly complex texts. These strategies can be modeled and shared by students and by teachers. In lesson planning, scaffolding of a text, which will be difficult for an ELL student or a struggling reader regardless of whether or not there are ELL students in the population, should be in evidence. To close this activity, think and discuss how the struggle may have been different for a student who speaks Japanese, Hindi, or another language that does not share cognates, the same alphabet, or the same letter sound pattern. It has been said that reading is the most complex of human functions, and neuroscience backs this up. Reading in any language poses a challenge, but reading in English is particularly difficult. Spoken English has approximately 5,000 different possible syllables. Written English uses a system of letters and alphabet to make up a spoken syllable. A letter alone does not refer to anything. It must be combined with other letters to represent a meaningful unit or syllable. The child must learn this complex alphabetic system in order to be able to decipher written words. Reading in English is further complicated by its orthography, the spelling of words. In some languages, such as Spanish, one letter has one sound. In English, one letter can represent several different sounds depending on its placement in a word. For reading comprehension to occur, English language learners, as they read, have to access the appropriate knowledge of the world and its people, places, events, and activities, have sufficient knowledge of how the English language works, and be able to interact with the same text using appropriate language processing and thinking strategies. All this in a language in which they are not yet proficient. When we apply the notion of multiple measures from our first KtO PD, from the circumstances of English language learners, we see how dramatically the domains of school processes, perceptions, demographics, and the student's previous learning can impact their ability to navigate not only written text in a new language, but their entire school experience. We have to ask ourselves, how are we continually evaluating the data we have, school processes, perceptions, demographics, and student learning, to customize learning for these vulnerable students? Take a moment now to think about and discuss how your school, your classroom, might be approaching this question. Virginia Collier developed the PRISM model to describe the factors that will influence English language learners' success in school. These factors form 4 distinct categories that are interrelated and interdependent: social and cultural processes, language development, academic development, and cognitive development. But the most important factor is relationships. As with all learners, if there are not strong, safe, and trusting relationships with teachers and other school staff, learning will not be maximized. Take a moment now to think and discuss how the building of these necessary relationships might be a challenge for a student who is an English language learner. Perhaps the most important support that we can provide for a student in order for them to be able to build these relationships is to be sure that we have culturally responsive environments and instruction in our schools. We know that this is important for all students. It is of particular importance and critical for English language learners. Culturally responsive instruction and environments are about cultivating an open attitude and new skills in yourself. It involves exploring and honoring your own culture while at the same time learning about and honoring other people's culture. In a moment, we will be viewing a video clip and examining it for evidence of culturally responsive instruction. The indicators below will guide us as we view the video, so keep them handy. These indicators are that the teacher acknowledges student differences and commonalities, validates students' cultural identity in classroom practices, educates students about the diversity of the world, promotes equity and mutual respect, assesses students' ability and achievement validity, meaning do the scores and the data, are they valid for this student given their ELL status, fostering a positive interrelationship among the school community, and that the teacher motivates students to become active participants in their learning. Our district has been spotlighting cultural responsiveness for some time now, and it is an integral part of the RISE rubric. Below, we can see how these indicators of culturally responsive instruction correlate to the RISE rubric. Take a moment and examine this, and then think about the level of implementation in your own classroom. Please take a look at page 3 of your participants guide. You'll notice that the note-taking columns are divided into the teacher moves and the students moves for you to take note of evidence of cultural responsive behaviors. You may wish to do both or divide the observation with a partner.
culturally responsive teaching and learning goes beyond the classroom walls as well. The following portion of this video presents a short lesson example on how to use culturally responsive techniques while introducing a Making Meaning book. Techniques to look for are call and response, action thermometer, raise your righteous hand, think, pair, share, pick a stick, bottoms up, heads together, and musical round the room.
Alright guys, today for Making Meaning we're going to read a new book called Amelia's Road. And to introduce the book, we are going to do an action thermometer. There is a statement on the board. If you agree with this statement, you're going to move to the front of the room. And if you disagree with the statement, you're going to move to the back of the room. If you kind of don't know, you can be somewhere in the middle. And will somebody raise their righteous hand so that we can read the statement out loud? Sydney.
Moving homes from place to place would be lots of fun.
Great job. All right. Ready? Any questions? I like to move it! Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so now we're going to do a think, pair, share. First, you're going to think about why did you move to this part of the room? Why do you agree or disagree with this statement? And then you will pair with someone next to you and talk about why you moved there. And then we will share with the whole classroom. I will pick sticks, okay? All right, so first, think. Now pair.
Sometimes I don't like it because I have to move away from it.
No, they will go to school and they won't know no one. So then they're gonna not know anybody.
Everybody give me 5.
Everybody give me 5.
Okay, that was very interesting listening to your conversations. I'd like to share those with the group. So if I'm going to pick a stick, and you are going to share what your partner said. All right? Pamela.
My partner said he won't like the neighborhood because it's like a lot of music and a lot of noise around, and he just can't go to sleep because he gotta wake up for school, and that's why.
So he wants to move around?
Mhm.
Okay, all right. Next stick. Carlos.
It won't be really great to go to a different school because if you really won't know anybody, then there'll be bullies and then they'll pick on you and then it make a horrible life for a year in school.
Okay, so you'd rather stay in the same place?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, one more stick. Landra.
Well, my partner said that she'd rather stand in the middle because it would be a little fun going to another school and moving because you might meet new friends and you might meet new persons. But she said it might be a little sad because you might miss your old friends and you might get really embarrassed in other schools.
So, a little bit on both sides.
Yeah.
All right. Take a seat, take a seat.
Take a load off your feet. Feet.
All right, great job, guys. Great thoughts. It's a perfect way to introduce our book, Amelia's Road, which is about a little girl who has to move around a lot. But before we read the book, we are going to preview 5 vocabulary words with round the room, okay? So the first word is grim.
Grim.
Second word is tidy.
Tidy.
Third word is occasion.
Occasion.
Fourth word is narrow.
Narrow.
And fifth word is twirl. Swirl. All right, so when we do around the room, you know you have to do bottoms up, heads together. You have to take turns writing and make sure you write in your group's box only. Okay? Any questions?
Yes.
All right. Bottoms up, heads together.
Bottoms up, heads together.
Chords is like bad.
Because the fiddle
Cannot fit because the bridge is too small.
So what's another
Spinner?
I think what was it again?
Boss it.
Bottoms up, heads together.
We already got bad. Stay.
Pause the recording here in order to discuss your findings with your colleagues. You may wish to use this list of look-fors in order to guide your conversation. In this next section of the presentation, we'll be taking a look at understanding first and second language processes as they relate to literacy development for ELL students. You're going to want to have pages 4 and 4A of your participant's guide ready. Page 4 is a reading guide and 4A is an article entitled Contextual Factors in Second Language Acquisition. There are a few different ways that you can approach this next activity. You could work individually reading the article and using the 8 topics to guide your note-taking. You might work with a partner, each partner taking one section, and then if there are 8 partners, sharing with the group when you're done the key points for each of the sections of the article. Or you may just want to do an overview using this recording. You are going to want to pause the presentation now if you want to do this by reading either individually. To give an overview of the article, we are going to take a look at the different factors that can affect an English language learner's acquisition of a second language. The first is their native language proficiency. In general, it's fair to say that the more proficient a student is in their native language, the more they have to build on in learning a second language. Since they've already learned the mechanics of one language, the research shows that they can then acquire another one more easily. And this isn't just oral language, but also literacy, metalinguistic development, and training in formal and academic features of language, language's use and knowledge. These all affect acquisition, and the more of that a student has, especially academic language features, the more quickly they can acquire a second language at that level as well. The second factor listed in the article is the student's prior knowledge of the second language, which in this case is English. And it seems kind of obvious that the more exposure that they've had to English, the more that they've been able to speak the language, perhaps read the language, the more quickly they'd be able to progress in their proficiency. But one thing to think about is that the learner may not have been speaking or reading in the formal register that's used in schools. They may have been speaking in a less academic less academic register or even a dialect of English. And so they are still going to have trouble when it comes to academic language. And this is something that teachers with English language learners in their buildings see all the time. The student can have a very nice informal conversation with others, but when it comes to the language that they need to be able to master in the classroom, they're still struggling. So we tend to think that they're more proficient than they really are once they've handled the informal register. The next factor that the article mentions is language distance, and this means how different or similar the new language, English, is to the learner's native language. So from an English speaker's perspective, Dutch or Spanish would be relatively easier to learn. The distance between English and those languages is smaller than it would be for, say, an English speaker to learn Arabic, Korean, or Vietnamese, which even use a different writing system. We saw this earlier in our activity with the French passage. For non-French speakers, that passage had some familiarity because of the relative nearness of French to English. The next factor mentioned in the article are language attitudes and status. And this isn't something that is a real obvious factor for most teachers who are not ESL teachers. And this refers to the relative prestige of different languages and dialects, and of the cultures and ethnic groups associated with them. It's important that we understand why a student is hesitant to transition over to a new language, or even eager. Transitioning over to a new language might carry with it the idea of breaking the associations that they have with ethnic groups and with their culture. They may come from a culture in which their dialect is of very high status, and speaking it confers that status. Losing that dialect to speak English, then, is also losing that tag of status. On the other hand, if they are speaking a dialect which is low status, they might be more eager to transition over to the more neutral English. In addition, the social groups that they are still with in their new learning situation, that is, if there are a group of students of the same ethnicity or culture learning English together, they might inhibit each other's transition to a new language. It's important that we understand that and stress to students that learning a second language does not mean giving up one's first language or dialect. The next factor affecting acquisition are needs and goals. And of course, each individual learner has their own language needs and language goals when it comes to learning English. Some are trying to assimilate totally and want to be able to speak both academic and more social English. Others are more focused on academic English and have goals, educational goals, which are directly tied to that. Understanding those needs and goals and how they differ between students helps us to support students as they acquire language. The next factor are peers and role models, and as we began to examine earlier, if you have many students of the same ethnicity and of the same native language together in a school, they can both inhibit and promote the acquisition of the new language. And I think that buildings where this is the case can attest to the fact that if the students begin to isolate themselves or begin to pressure one of their native language speakers to not assimilate, that can inhibit the students' acquisition. On the other hand, they can also be supportive of each other, practicing the language outside of the classroom, practicing speaking English. And the eighth factor in the article speaks to motivation and classroom interactions. and as with all students, the more that the student participates and receives positive, supportive feedback and encouragement during the struggle to learn a new language, the more proficiency they will acquire. We're going to take a little bit deeper look at the aspect of language acquisition mentioned in number 2 in the previous slide, knowledge of the second language, and talk about the level of proficiency and the difference between social language and academic language. If you look at the two columns that compare social language with academic language in the slide, you see that social language is more informal, simple, concrete, and social language that we use on a day-to-day basis with each other, just the pleasantries of daily language, are usually less than about 3,000 words. It develops early, social language, in a native speaker. It develops in the first 3 years of life, and some examples they provide are talking with friends, social networks, and the writing of informal letters. But you can see a big jump in difficulty when we talk about the language that ELL students are trying to acquire when they're in school. They need to acquire and receive instruction in academic language even after they are able to communicate pretty well in the social language of English, because academic language is the language necessary to navigate content. It's the language necessary to learn from text and to be able to proceed with their educational goals. Academic language involves much more than vocabulary specific to a content area. It involves the content's different forms of discourse, the different text features, language forms, and functions that you find among and between content areas. In the past in our district, we've used the term disciplinary literacy to refer to a student's ability to navigate these aspects of language among the different content areas. So it's more than just vocabulary specific to science, say, or social study. It's also the text features and forms and habits of thought that will be present in the text. Notice the length of time and number of words needed to master social language as opposed to academic language. And we'll see here why ELL students and many of our students who are otherwise verbally skilled still struggle with content. As we consider our guiding question, what are the best pathways to maximize ELL's ability to navigate content, we see the third point, which is that we need to have high but realistic expectations for English language learners based on their English language proficiency levels. But outside of the ESL department and the teachers who specialize in this, not many educators have a good understanding of what these proficiency levels mean or the expectations when we're presented with a student's proficiency level. And so for that reason, we want to take a look at the overlays that are provided at this link at the pdesas.org website, and you'll be able to get a better understanding of the 5 levels of proficiency as they relate to students' English language learners' ability to communicate information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content areas. And this is really the one standard that would apply across all content areas: science, social studies, the arts. I think there's a separate one for mathematics, but if you take a look at this one, the speaking in your classroom would fall on a continuum of level 1 to level 5. If you have a student coming into your classroom and they are on the developing level, level 3, you would expect them to be able to retell a literary selection using visual support. And you would expect them to be able to tell that, to retell to a partner. If you would have another student who would say be on a level 4, you would expect them to be able to give persuasive speeches that are supported visually. So knowing where a student is on this spectrum can help you set your expectations at the appropriate level so that you're providing rigorous expectations but not unrealistic expectations for your English language learner. Here in the domain of writing, we can see the same thing. The competencies, concepts, and vocabulary, especially the vocabulary here associated with academic discourse in your content area. You see that we have levels 1 through 5 again, and a speaking and writing correspondence. This is the site for math, and you can also get competencies and overlays for the English language learners in mathematics on the PDE SAS website. This concludes the 8th KtO Professional Development Turnaround Session. If you have any questions, concerns, want to learn more, or want to begin implementing some of the strategies that we learned about in this presentation, please see your point person or your KtO specialist for support. The 9th and final KtO training will take place on May 28th and 29th. The 28th for the elementary grades and the 29th for the 6-12 grade span. This final session will focus on learners with special needs and is entitled Supporting Learners with Special Needs. Staff members from your special education department might be eager to attend this session and provide turnaround. Please make sure that you have signed the KtO sheet that you have participated in this training, and thanks again for